Here is Scribo Verde Prato, a green ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. Being that this is the 1400th, I know that's not normally a milestone, but man, I never thought I would make it this far. Being that it's gone so far, I decided to change up the format earlier instead of waiting for January so I could change up on a centennial moment. So, new format. This is a bright, fresh green that is fun on the page, and I know I've been enjoying the heck out of using it. It is a consistent performer across the line of papers. From the premium stuff, the non-fountain pen friendly paper, it's performing just as well, except of course copy paper. This is reminiscent of some other greens, but just different enough to keep it on the radar. I don't normally go for bright greens, but having enjoyed this enough that I would really love to add a bottle of this to my stash. The pen for today is a Pelikan M1000. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the Clairfontaine, we get a bright, beautiful green on the page. It doesn't feather and it doesn't spread. It does shade incredibly well. Not like huge camouflage shading, which is normally what I go for with greens, but it's doing such a great job, I must admit. Looking at admit on the second line, where the A is lighter than the DMI and that T at the end, very dark. How about that on the first line, where the T is very light, the H darkens up quite a bit, the A lightens, the T dark. Just a thought. I'm not going to go through it. I think this is great. I love what I'm seeing. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes back here. Let's take a look at some other inks from the same manufacturer. Here is Scribo Arancio de Sicilio. Here is Scribo Blue Capri. Here is Scribo Chianti. Here is Scribo Blue Cosmico. The next writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter's Notebook. Looking at the Portage Reporter Notebook, we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it does shade, though noticeably less than it did on the Clairfontaine. I mean, you can discover some of it looking at discovered on the second line, where the D is lighter than the I. It becomes a nice mid-tone through most all of the word until the D at the end. But what I get is a great performance, a very nice looking ink on this paper. Certainly a great combination. Now, I know this paper does well with fountain pen inks. It's why I keep using it, but so nice. I'm just excited about the new format. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. The next writing sample is done on a national brand Steno notebook. Taking a look at the national brand Steno notebook, we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine, meaning what we have is a very opaque ink. Even with as bright and I want to say light, but it's not that it's light, it's a bright green. It's a very lively color. And with that, though, I would expect this paper to have some effect on it, but it doesn't, because this is very opaque, apparently, as a color. No feather, no spread. It shades about as well as it was on the Clairfontaine. You can see it in certain areas much more than others. I think it shades as well, not as frequently. Okay, so if you look at well on the first line, the last L is darker than the rest of the word. Also, underneath that, no shading, but he right next to that, much darker. Absolutely great combination for what we have here. Looking at the back of the page, no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes here. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook. Looking at the Rhodia paper, we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather and it doesn't spread, although it does shade nowhere near what we had with the Clairfontaine. Not nearly as much, only a light seasoning. Frequently last letter of word, mostly one tone, a bit disappointing in that kind of way. The paper's made by the same company, but they're not the same paper. I will say it stands out from the quad rule without any kind of a problem, even being this bright green, which is the reason to look at this on the quad. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Ackerman Dutch Masters number 10. Here is Birmingham Pen Company Frank Gorshin Riddle Green. Here is Califolio Olive. Here is Diamine Apple Glory. The next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook. Here we get the composition lab notebook. This is made in Vietnam. Make sure that when you get them, if you're using fountain pens, that's what you do. What I get is the same color as the Clairfontaine. No feather, no spread. It does have a few moments of shading that you can spot. Mostly what we're getting really is a bright, vivid green on the page that is still standing out against this quad rule without any kind of a problem. I think this is something that I'm going to give a student bonus points for using because it looks great. Looking at the back of the page, no bleeding, no ghosting, outstanding. While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page. Here is Bookbinders Everglades Rat Snake. Here is KWZ Iron Gall Violet number 2. Here is Mont Blanc Ultra Black. Here is Blackstone Conzia Red. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the 20-pound copy paper, we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It's the same bright green. It hasn't lost that liveliness, but it's feathering and spreading a lot, which you really do expect of Clairfontaine. With that, it's not doing a horrible thing, meaning I think it's readable, but this is a wet pen, so you usually are going to get more bleed and ghost, or more bleed and spread. Good Lord, bleed and spread. I'm not there yet. More feather and more spread for it, and we're definitely getting that in this case. And it is, I don't want to say disappointed, expected, but not a combination that I would really want. Something I would avoid myself. Looking at the back of the page, you see why there was so much feather and spread. Look at how deep that ink got into the paper. Now, there's no taking notes back here, that's for sure, but nothing bled through touching the page underneath. So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? On this yellow, I can't help but notice how it really looks the same as all the other papers. It's just such a consistent performer. So the pen, I'm using a wet fine pen, and I really feel like this was a good choice. I have to think that a dry pen would have come across a bit too light and disappointing. So for me, I'm going to go with a wet fine or medium. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.